Today's guest is Alistair King, co-founder and director of Rhodes Pet Science, the fastest growing pet company in the world. Launched 5 years ago, Rhodes is already on track to generate $200 million in retail sales, led by its flagship brand Bonkers, a playful, science-driven range of pet treats now available in over 150,000 stores worldwide and responsible for a third of the total industry growth in the US. In this episode, Alistair shares how he went from Yes national champion to co-founding a global company that's disrupting an industry dominated by legacy giants. We'll talk about breaking into traditional markets, scaling fast without losing focus, and the lessons he's learned building brands that people and their pets truly love. Welcome to the Launchpad, Alistair. It's lovely to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So I think we should start with the best part of that intro, for me anyway. Yes national champion in 2017. Tell us a little bit about your Yes journey and your Yes product, and kind of what that was all like.
Yeah, so I think I did 2 years of Young Enterprise Scheme. So did it first in year 12, and then in year 13, kind of took it a lot more seriously, I think. So our business was a children's book called Where's Wally? So essentially a play on the Where's Wally concept, but a New Zealand version. So a sheep that you had to kind of find throughout different New Zealand scenes. And I think for me, Young Enterprise Scheme was kind of my first taste of business, but like immediately absolutely loved it. I actually remember vividly after, I think it was our regional Dragon's Den we did in my year 12. Like after that, we didn't even win that. I think we were like third or fourth, but I remember afterwards, I was like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And then in year 13, took it much more seriously. And we kind of went all in for the year. I remember the group of us, there was like 5 of us, I think. And kind of had this mindset of like, we had a business at that stage with the book, and we're like, let's see how far we can push this. And so we would just spend like the year hustling, and we sold it into, I think, like 200 Paper Plus stores and around the country, all the school libraries, public libraries, sold it to like embassies around the world as well. So yeah, we kind of went all in, and it was a lot of good fun.
As a 17-year-old, how do you get into Paper Plus? Is it just that, no one says yes to a teenager, or no one says no to a teenager? Or?
That definitely helps a lot. Like, I think that's the one thing you learn is like people want to help you when you're young.
Yeah.
But I think, to get really tactical, Paper Plus is a lot of the stores have ability to make their own decisions. So you don't kind of have to get that head office on board. You can go store to store and kind of sell individual store owners. But I remember we just went to the local Paper Plus in Nelson, managed to get the store owner to let us put the books basically on shelf and see what happened. And then when it got mates to go and buy them, got great sales results, and then emailed every Paper Plus store in the country being like, look how good our book sells. So that certainly was like, yeah, that's kind of how we scaled it up around the country.
Pretty cool. From there, what was your journey after Yes? How did that look, and did it shape what you went on to kind of do?
Yeah, so I finished school, and we kind of wrapped up the Young Enterprise Scheme business as soon as I finished school. I knew I wanted to do something in business, but didn't really grow up in an entrepreneurial family. Grew up in Nelson, so didn't really kind of know what I wanted to. Knew what I wanted to do business, but didn't really know how to go about it. Probably be the way to put it. So I ended up going to university for a year down in Dunedin. And then while I was in university, spent very little time studying and a lot of time trying to kind of work out what to do from a business perspective. So I ended up emailing a bunch of people and just said, look, I want to work for you for free just to like learn. And through that process, I got introduced to, through few different people, and eventually got introduced to Nick, one of the Zuru founders. Flew up to Auckland, met with him. We're walking through the supermarket, and we're basically like, let's start a business together. And that's where the idea for pet food came. And so he's like, well, drop out, move up to Auckland, and let's do this and go all in. And yeah, that was end of first year uni, dropped out, moved up here. And it was, 5-6 years ago now. So
no looking back.
No, it's been a pretty chaotic 6 years since then, but loved it every step of the way.
Awesome. I guess, what did that journey look like? You're walking through a supermarket, and you kind of, how did you identify that pet food or the pet market was where you wanted to start your business?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about the pet category is it's dominated by a couple of major players. So Mars and Nestle, 2 chocolate companies, they both actually sell more pet food than chocolate, but they control about 60 to 70% of the pet care market globally. And it's a huge category, as you can probably imagine. And so, whenever you have a category like that with a couple of major players, what you tend to get is quite a big disconnect between what the manufacturers deliver and what customers want,
Mm.
because there's just less competition and less incentive to really innovate. And so we kind of saw this opportunity to come in and do something which is much more modern. You kind of had this proliferation at the same time of what we've called like the premiumization of pet care, where millennial and Gen Z pet owners, they care a lot more about their pets, treat them a lot more like family, care a lot more about the ingredients. And so we kind of saw this opportunity to deliver a solution that was kind of in that space in the grocery supermarket kind of environment. So that was kind of the thesis. And then we launched it first up in Canada and learned very quickly that our thesis was completely wrong. Had to rework everything, but yeah, learned a ton and yeah, changed a lot after that as well.
So early days, you're pretty young. You're in Canada starting kind of
Yeah.
a pet food company, realizing you maybe got a little wrong. What do those days look like for you? Like what were they like?
So funny story actually. I remember we pitched to Walmart Canada, so the biggest retailer in Canada. And I remember we pitched to them in the morning, and the buyer who we were pitching to there was absolutely loved it. She's like, "Come back this afternoon and like let's build the whole range together." So I went back that afternoon. We mapped out like these are the items we want. This is what we want to do. They're like, "Cool, we're going to get behind this in a massive way." So I think it was like a full chain launch across all their stores, 400 and something odd stores. And then so I wrapped up those meetings, went away, started working with the factory that we had to get everything set up and prepped for launch. I think it was 4 weeks out from launch, I get a call. No, sorry, a little further. 6 weeks out from launch, I get a call from the factory. And they're basically like, look, your packaging doesn't work on our machines. So we can't fill any of your product. And I'm like, this is a disaster. And they were basically like, you're going to have to find another factory. And so I was like, look, just let me get on a plane. I'll be with you like in 48 hours. Let's talk it through in person. So had that call 3 hours later. I was on a plane out of Auckland, flew all the way over to St. Louis in Missouri. And then I was too young to rent a car. The factory was out in the middle of nowhere. So I had to get an Uber. I think it was like 400 Ks across like rural Missouri. It's like a 300 US dollar Uber to get to this factory. Get to this factory, I'm basically begging the guy there saying, look, like, just like, give us a chance. Like, we need to find a way to make this work. Like, I need your help. So he's basically like, look, like, you can hand pack the product, and we'll give you a couple of people to help, but it's not working on the bags aren't working on the equipment. So I lived in this small town. This town's like 3,000 people, I think. There's like a McDonald's, a Subway, and like a pet food factory. It's kind of like the whole town. I lived in that town for 4 weeks, slept in the factory, like worked nonstop, like hand packing all the bags. I remember it was 120,000 kilos was the first order. So it's like 8 truckloads of product that we like hand packed one by one. So it took like 4 weeks nonstop. And then actually, I remember that it was Easter, must have been Easter of 2020, I think. The just before we were finishing, sorry, this is a long story, but just before we were finishing, it was like 2 days before I got food poisoning. And so it was like right down to the wire, right? Like because there was a deadline that Walmart were picking up the product. We had to get it all packed by then. So I get food poisoning, but we've got a whole bunch of product to pack. So I'm in the factory. I think I had to do like a 36-hour shift with no sleep. And because I had food poisoning, it was a wreck. Couldn't keep food down, couldn't drink. Eventually we got everything done on time, finished the shift, went home or went back to like a hotel and went through the Macca's drive-through because I was like, I need food. Got like a hash brown because that's all I could think to stomach. Got back to the hotel room, had the hash brown, vomited everywhere, and then crashed for like 2 days.
But you got all of your product to Walmart.
Yeah. So that's what life was like. To answer your question.
Do you think any of your kind of journey through Yes helped you with just the like keep going, anything's possible kind of mentality, just to know any different?
Yeah, I think particularly in year 13, the thing with Yes that surprised me a little bit was just kind of broke through the expectations of what you thought was possible. Like when we started the Young Express team business, kind of had no real concept of what we could do. And then 6 months later, when you've got your book and paper pluses around the country, like it's so much more than you could have expected. And it kind of makes you rethink, like, oh, if you actually go really hard at something, what the possible outcomes are.
Mhm.
So I think that for me was the biggest thing. I think it fostered probably a bit of ambition in a sense
Mm.
to be able to say, hey, let's like not limit ourselves. Let's focus on just doing like pushing as hard as we can and doing the right things, and the outcomes will take care of itself.
And that means packing pet food for 36 hours.
Evidently, yeah.
Cool. I guess we've touched a little on the disrupting kind of traditional market and that there were two giant kind of players. Um, what did that kind of mean? How was entering that would have been quite daunting, I suppose, but how do you crack it? How do you kind of get in that spot?
And less daunting, more exciting, I think,
Hmm.
because I think the thing about a big category is that I think a lot of people steer away from big categories, but I actually think they're the best categories to play in for a few reasons. One, you got proven demand. You know this is a type of product that people want, and so there's proven demand there. I think the other thing as well is when you've got big categories, there's also so many areas in those categories, so many like cracks in the armor in a
Yep.
sense. There's so many areas you can go into and different angles you can take on a product to be able to solve a big enough problem. And I think as well, we always think about when you're developing a product, you need an angle, right? It's got to be something that is different from what exists at the moment. Otherwise, no one's going to buy it. So it's like, what's the angle you can take? And then how do you find an angle which is sufficiently or maximally like relevant to a big enough audience? So, for example, going back to what I mentioned before around our first product, the angle was this millennial Gen Z kind of driven pet food that was focused on ingredients. So we kind
Hmm.
of identified that, we thought, as like a big white space that was, if we got that right, there'd be enough people globally that would want that. So
Hmm.
I think finding that angle is the key thing. And in a big category against big players, there's lots of different angles you can take to build really big businesses. Because what's something that might be a too smaller space for like a Mars or Nestle to go into is actually a huge opportunity for a smaller player.
So would you say that was kind of your strategy for finding those cracks and those competitive markets to fill, um, finding kind of the small gaps that were big for you and little for the big players?
Yeah, I think we probably always looked for the big gaps.
Yeah.
I don't think we never took a mindset of trying to find niche areas per se, but it was always about in big categories. It was like, yeah, how do we find an area where we think it is underserved or there's an angle for us to do something different, and then that's a big problem to solve for consumers. And I think that comes in many ways, right? I think generally, at least in the product business or the consumer goods business, I think there's kind of generally three different ways where you can differentiate. There's on price, there's on product, and there's on brand and marketing. And I think the best products that we've ever developed have multiple of those elements. So it might be really differentiate on brand and marketing, but then also quite disruptive on price. I think you need one of those to succeed, but if you get two or three, like that's the magic.
When did you kind of realize you were making a difference and kind of breaking through? What was the moment? Was there a moment for you, or did it just kind of took a step back and went, oh, actually, we've maybe,
I,
yeah.
I don't think it ever has, to be honest with you. Like I still feel like now we're 1% of what we think we can build and
Hmm.
what we want to build. So it's never like felt like we're there. So yeah, it's all. I think you're always focusing as well on what's in front of you, and you're like constantly just solving problems and problems and problems, and then you like look back over 6 months and you see the progress you've made. But like in the day to day, you don't think about it as much. I don't think.
You've kind of managed to combine scientific innovation with some of the products that you've created with products that emotionally kind of connect with pet owners. How intentional was that kind of strategy and that balance that you've found with your products?
I think like the the biggest thing that's been intentional is that we've always had this mindset of how do we constantly improve. And the thesis that you have when you go in, and even now when we're developing products, like the thesis that we have around a given product at the beginning, it changes, and you're never like got it completely right at the beginning. And so for us, it's much more about how do you have a mindset of like constantly improving, and that path like and strategy shifts as you go along, and you end up with something which is like a much stronger strategy because of that. And I think to probably use a example there, um, the pet industry, broadly speaking, I think has kind of three core buckets. The first is around big legacy brands. Like historically, that had been kind of the model to win. It was big brand names. And then about 25 years ago, you kind of saw this emergence of a second pillar around natural, holistic feeding, raw diets, those kind of things.
Mhm.
And there's kind of this third pillar now that's emerging around fun and joy and connection. And that's very much where we play, but we've learnt that through the evolution of the last 5 years about where we win and where we don't win and the role we can play and how we're so different as a business to those big players that that is our angle. But that was never the thesis at the beginning. We've got there by this kind of iterative process of failing and winning and seeing what happens and changing things, and you kind of work it out as you go along.
Cool. I mean, many young founders dream of kind of tackling your traditional players and breaking through those markets, but they don't know where to start. What's your kind of advice for spotting opportunities in the industry and kind of making a play for it?
I mean, it's probably a little bit like cliche, I think, but you kind of do just have to start because, as I said, it's never the strategy you end up with is never what you think it is going in. You just have to back yourself to work it out along the way, and just have a mindset of being like one all in. Like you just have to be, you have to almost like burn the boats in a sense, being like, we're going to work this out no matter what it takes, and be super persistent and resilient throughout that process as well. Because I think, at
Mm.
least for us, it's taken us in some areas of the business to get right a lot longer than we ever expected, but you just have to persist through that. So I think it's persistence. I think it's just, yeah, being all in. And I think it's just having a mindset of improvement, and then just starting ultimately.
Awesome. So you're set to reach kind of 200 million sales kind of in your first 5 years, which is pretty phenomenal. What were the biggest factors behind that growth, do you think, other than the mindset, which I think you've kind of talked to, which is just keep going and there's always more and it's only a drop in the bucket. But is there other bits that have played a part in getting to that kind of growth?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we'll do about 200 million retail sales this year. And I think for us, we've always been ambitious from the beginning. And I think how that manifests in the business is we went global from day one. Like we've never, a lot of New Zealand businesses, I think, for very good reasons, to be fair, have a mindset of they'll launch in New Zealand and then maybe 5 years later or 10 years later, they'll expand into Australia. And then maybe 5, 10 years after that, they might expand to Southeast Asia.
Mhm.
Literally, we pitched to everyone and went everywhere on day one, probably to our detriment to an extent. I think you can push that too far, and we absolutely have in some areas. But I think if you actually have that mindset of like, let's try do everything, then you kind of learn where the line is, and actually you end up being able to do far more than you ever thought you could because you've kind of pushed those boundaries. And so, yeah, we've launched in probably 30 plus countries, like with our Bonkers brand, for example, which is 3 years old, just gone over 3 years old. We've launched in 30 plus countries in that time. So it's very much, I think, having a mindset of just going big from day one, and then also just constantly improving and also being like it's a little bit of a juxtaposition, but also being really ruthless where we need to around what is and isn't working. Like we've launched more brands that haven't worked than those that have, as an example.
Mhm.
But when things don't work, we haven't been precious and we've killed it and we've moved on to the next one because the opportunity cost of not doing that is so significant that you just
Mhm.
have to like constantly like be ambitious, but then also cut back and focus and focus and focus. There's like a tension there that's you're always trying to balance.
Yeah. And then you touched on a little bit that you've grown pretty quickly. Any growing pains? Anything kind of, challenging about the speed in which you've grown and how you've had to navigate those growing pains?
Yeah, I think every business that's growing quickly obviously has growing pains, and I think different pains as well. I think for us, there's obviously just like it's a lot of firefighting, and I think as your business gets bigger, you shift from being more reactive to being able to be a little bit more proactive, like in the early days, and to some extent still now. I think like you spend a lot of time fighting fires, and you're constantly reacting to things, and you're always almost like jumping around the business, solving problems, but also like identifying which part of the business needs the most support at that
Hmm.
given time. So maybe it's like the business is growing really quickly and the supply chain is not keeping up and you've got to go and solve that, or your manufacturing is not keeping up, or your sales isn't keeping up, and you've got to work out like at what given time, or at any given time, what part of the business is kind of lagging behind that you have to
Hmm.
dive into and problem solve. And so I think that's just part of it, to be honest. And I think, yeah, if you have that improvement mindset, you see all of those areas as just opportunities to improve versus pain, in a sense, because it's kind of an unavoidable part of growing.
Obviously, you've had that rapid growth, but you're also a young founder who, has had to grow with the business. You talk about being on the factory floor, filling, all of those orders for your first Walmart. What does that look like now for you? What is that like growing with the business?
Yeah, obviously a lot's changed. I think I've been very fortunate as well that as the business has grown. Like in the beginning, you're doing everything, right?
Mhm.
Like you're the customer service, you're the marketing, you're the manufacturing, you're everything. And as the business grows, you kind of bit by bit hand over those responsibilities to different people. But what it's meant, I think, is that while every single time I've handed over responsibility to someone else, the level of that given function has massively improved. Like when we brought in a proper marketing team versus letting me doing it, it was night and day. But like what that's meant is I've been fortunate that in all of these different areas of the business, I've been able to build quite a bit of context as terms of how that area works, the value of it. Like we've had in the past, we've had major supply chain issues or manufacturing issues, and when you dive into those problems and have to manage that yourself, you build an appreciation for how that part of the business works, so that in future, if you ever need to kind of get back into that level of detail, you have the context to do so. So I think as the business has grown, um, I've built a lot of context around different areas of the business. And I think it gets to a level of scale eventually, right, where you can't be across everything. Um, but I think one of the things I've learned from Nick in particular and his brother Matt as well is that you still have to be in a level of detail, but you've got to be really selective about where those areas are. And I think you have to look at as a founder or CEO or whatever it is, it's like where are the areas where you can have the biggest impact, not only from a skill set perspective, but also from a leverage perspective.
Mhm.
So a good example of that would be like me spending a lot of time on product, as an example, is a really good return on investment. Because if we get product right, that makes selling easier. It means we probably have, because if we get product right, we get a really good cost on product. It means selling's easier. It means we've got more margin to put into marketing. It means we can have a better retail price so we can drive more volume. It means that we can manufacture and scale up more easily as well. So all of these different downstream things are benefited by us just putting a lot of effort into getting product right.
Mhm.
And so I kind of think of it now of like it's almost like a T-shape leadership strategy where you're really deep on a few things which are really important to driving the business, and they give you a lot of leverage downstream in terms of driving the business. And then there's areas where you're less across, but you still kind of keep across the high level details of value.
It can be isolating as a leader, and especially as a young leader, when maybe the people around you, your friends or those of the similar age, aren't in the same position as you. How have you combated that? What do you do in order to make sure that you don't kind of feel lonely?
Yeah, I think, look, I've been fortunate that been able to work very closely with Nick and his brother Matt as well for 6 years. So you kind of having people like that you can lean on is massive, and kind of in the wider Zuru ecosystem as well. There's a few other people that similar age to me have kind of been doing very cool things, and so there's been a little bit of a network there which I've been fortunate to be able to kind of build, which has helped a lot, I think. So um, yeah.
Would you have any kind of advice for other young founders that maybe don't naturally have that inbuilt network about how they go about building that for themselves?
I think everyone's different in a sense, right? Like I think some people you just need to work out to what extent do you need support.
Hmm.
And then what does that look like to the individual? Like I think I probably need a lot less support than the average person. Like I'm very insular and kind of in my own head about things. But I think other people are different. I think you have to work out what's your style and then proactively work at how do you put people around you to do that, whether that's family, whether that's friends, whether that's mentors, whatever it is. Um, yeah.
Cool. Is there a kind of highlight to your journey so far? Something that has kind of been a real kind of moment for you to reflect on over your journey from high school to where you are now?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. Um, Whenever you launch a new product, that's always a cool experience. Like you spend sometimes years developing something, and often now as the business gets bigger, we're developing more and more complex things, and there's
Mm.
products that we're spending 3-4 years developing and solving really complex engineering problems to do so. And then by the time you get that to shelf and walk into the store and see that for the first time, like that's always a really cool experience, because you've seen every single like atom of that product be built and now there in a finished product. And then I think in addition to that, like we're fortunate that we're often meeting with some of the biggest retailers in the world, and meeting with leadership and some of the biggest retailers in the world as well. And that's always a cool experience because you're really like in the room with some very, very cool people, and learning a lot in all those experiences as well.
Mm. Awesome. Before we kind of wrap up, I think we always like to ask kind of what is your biggest tip or kind of advice for young founders or someone aspiring to get into that entrepreneurship journey, and what would you love to have known or have been told?
I think it depends on the business you're trying to build. It's a very different mindset and strategy if you're trying to build a very, very big business versus a business that is smaller but it's still impactful. And I think if your mindset is to build a really big business, you have to be all in, like completely, utterly, every second, all in. And so I think that is probably the biggest thing that anyone who's aspiring to do something in a big scale, to not kid yourself about that. Like there's so many trade-offs to that and there's so many downsides to that. There's so many upsides as well, but like ultimately, if you're not approaching it with the mindset of like, this is going to be my life and like this is what I'm doing and I'm just going to commit to this as long as it takes, no matter how hard it gets, I'm like not going to quit. Like if you don't have that mindset, then I think it becomes really, really challenging because it's going to be hard, and you're going to have to sacrifice a lot. And if you're not like all in on that being okay, then it's going to be really challenging.
Got to love what you do, right?
Absolutely.
Business isn't easy, but it is rewarding.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I think there is some true pieces of gold in what you've said there. From identifying gaps in traditional industries to scaling companies, you've got an impressive story and clearly a masterclass in vision and innovation and perseverance, especially handpacking all of those the first bags. I hope those first customers understand how precious they were.
Evidently no, because it didn't sell very well at the time.
But we've loved this episode. So make sure you follow along the Launchpad podcast wherever you're listening and share this with someone who's dreamed of building something extraordinary. Thanks for joining us, Alistair. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much.